Hi, welcome to this week's episode of Magis Moments. This week we're going to touch on discernment of spirits. Not the discernment in Webster's dictionary that is about decision making or judgment, but discernment of spirits in Ignatian Spirituality. Before we go there, it might be helpful to spend a little time telling you a little bit more about St. Ignatius's life. At the introduction of this series, I shared a little bit about how his initial desires for worldly fame and glory shifted over time and through the grace of God into desires for prayer and service and simplicity. The major pivot point, maybe, for St. Ignatius was when he was engaged in that glory-seeking phase of his life. Being a soldier, battling for his kingdom, on the battlefield, he got hit in the leg by a cannonball. Major blast, major injury. His leg was mangled. They had to carry him back over the course of 2 weeks to his castle and put him in bed to recuperate. Keep in mind, this was the 1500s. There wasn't the advances in medicine we have, and the recuperation took several long months. He also didn't have what we have today as far as Netflix or an iPhone or an iPad. It was kind of left to just a couple of things that he could do. One was to daydream, and he did have an avid imagination. Another was to read. And the only two books on his bedside table, by the grace of God, were the life of Christ and the lives of the saints. So during that long recuperation period, he did a lot of reading and a lot of daydreaming. What he would find, because he was very introspective, as he was daydreaming on those initial desires of worldly fame and glory, he would come out of those imaginings feeling a little bit dry and empty. But when he was daydreaming about the books he was reading, about being a saint like the saints he was reading about, changing his life to be more holy, he would feel out of those daydreams being fulfilled and inspired. What he was paying attention to is what he would later come to call motions of the soul. And it would become this practice called Discernment of Spirits, later when he wrote the spiritual exercises. The practice of discernment of spirits can be a little complicated. So we're going to make it a little simpler for our practice, assuming that we're all working on deepening our relationship with Christ. Since you're watching this series, that's the assumption. If we're on that trek of trying to deepen our relationship with Christ, then those inner movements, which Ignatius watched in his bed, those inner movements that pulled him into a place of emptiness and dryness, might be called spiritual desolations. And the counter movements, those that drew him more toward feeling fulfilled and purposeful, spiritual consolations. So let's practice this a little bit as you take a comfortable seat and maybe consider your own cannonball moment from the past, or maybe you've got something going on right now that has kind of knocked you off your feet a little bit. Considering those inner movements, and these are beyond the skin surface, those deep movements inside, those deep feelings, those deep thoughts, those deep passions, your attractions, what repulses you, those things that pull us toward feeling fulfilled and purposeful, toward love, toward relationship with Christ, toward being inspired and hope-filled. Those spiritual consolations, when we feel that happening inside of us, we want to savor those. We want to jot them down, because there will be different seasons in our life when we don't feel so inspired, so loved, and so purposeful. So keep track of those consolations. On the other hand, conversely, those movements inside that draw us away from Christ in our cannonball moments or in our day-to-day life, that leave us feeling dry and empty, that lead us away from faith and hope and love, these desolations are not aligned with God's Holy Spirit as the first type is, the consolations, what draws us toward Him. That's the Holy Spirit moving through us. But these counter movements are a different spirit that are pulling us away. So as you notice those big movements happening in your life, then just keep track of those as well. Try to spend a little more time in prayer or going to church or surrounding yourself with faith-filled friends who can support you during this time, remembering again that it's temporary. And if you are indeed on this trek to deepen your relationship with Christ, you will see consolations again. Thank you so much for practicing today.